Hey there, this is Rocky from BusinessWritingTutorials.com, and welcome to the next installment in this mini-series on punctuation. In this lesson we're going to look at semicolons and when to use them. And although semicolons sound a little scary, they're actually pretty easy to deal with. Much easier than commas. That's because there's only two major uses of semicolons. There are some less frequently used situations such as particular citation styles and some other obscure situations that we won't worry about right now. Let's just focus on the two that you actually have to know for most situations. So we'll look at lists, or a particular kind of list I should say. So let's start with lists. And the first question that should come to mind is what kind of lists, because we usually just use commas with lists, and that's true. It's often taught that semicolons are used in long or complex lists. That's not the most accurate way to describe it. It is true most of the time, but we use semicolons in lists with internal commas, lists that already have commas for some other purpose. Let's look at a couple of examples. If we have a simple list, I like tacos, pizza, and hamburgers, we just use commas, no problem. But if we want to add some kind of sublist or have categorical groupings, then we would need to show where the larger groupings occur and the smaller ones. So let's say we filled out our likes for Mexican food here and we added a little sublist. I like tacos, fajitas, and enchiladas, pizza, and hamburgers. So we use the semicolons to show where the larger categorical groupings occur, and then these commas are used for the sublists. It doesn't really matter where the sublist occurs. It could be in the middle or the end. Punctuation would still be the same with the semicolon showing the larger groupings. Of course, we could make this one long list. We could say I like pizza, tacos, fajitas. We would remove this word and, enchiladas, and hamburgers, and that would just use commas because there are no larger categorical groupings. Another example where you might see semicolons in lists is when you have some kind of descriptive or explanatory information for one or more of the items. So in this example here, when you first glance at the sentence, it's a little tricky to read. Of course, you would come to the right meaning after you stopped for a second, but you don't want to force your reader to stop and decipher the meaning of your sentence, or even stop just because it's tricky on the eyes. In this case, we have an easy solution. We can add our semicolon. So that's it for lists. Let's take a look at our second usage for semicolons, using them to join clauses. So in the fourth lesson in the comma usage video, we looked at a situation where we had two independent clauses joined by a coordinated conjunction. For the semicolons, we're going to look at situations where we have two independent clauses not joined by a coordinated conjunction. And just to put that again in lay terms, an independent clause is a sentence component that can stand on its own as a grammatically complete thought, and basically a sentence. And coordinated conjunctions are just these 7 words: and, but, or, so, yet, nor, for. So to put this in simpler terms, we're going to use a semicolon between the two sentences we had not joined by one of these 7 words. Well, in that video we had I read a book, comma, and she listened to music. But we've slightly changed it here. We've taken away that coordinated conjunction and. So we just have the two components, I read a book, she listened to music. Well, our check here is, can the two components stand on their own as grammatically complete sentences? And the first one can and the second one can. And now our check, unlike the comma check for a semicolon, is that we don't have a coordinated conjunction. So we quickly look and we don't have one of these 7 words. So we've met all the criteria for using a semicolon. Another example. This is the example that we actually had in the previous video. In this case, we do have the two grammatically complete components, but when we do a quick check, we see that we do have one of the 7 coordinated conjunctions, so we can't use a semicolon. Now, you might have a question as to why we're bothering with the semicolon at all. Can't we just use a period instead of the semicolon? And the answer is yes. You can always use a period in cases where you would want to use a semicolon, and not in the lists, of course, but to join the two sentences. So basically, your question is, for yourself will be, do you want to join the two sentences with a period over the semicolon? So how do you decide? Well, in most cases you just use a period and you continue on as usual. The special cases when you want to use a semicolon are when the two sentences are really closely related and each sentence makes part of the whole point. So when the two sentences are best kept together to make the full point, that's when you would want to use a semicolon. Let's look at a couple examples. Oftentimes you will see this happen when you're joining two sentences with a transition word, such as however, therefore, or an adverb like consequently or subsequently. So here's an example. I was planning to write the paper early. However, I procrastinated until the last minute. Yes, you could replace this semicolon with a period and capitalize however, and that would also be perfectly acceptable. Another example. I thought I wouldn't be able to go. Fortunately, my meeting was canceled. So again, you could replace the semicolon with a period. The idea is that the two ideas in these sentences are so closely connected that they're better expressed together.